What's up, basketball fans? Welcome to the Warriors Report. It's time to talk about the Toronto Raptors because they'll have plenty of options with the 13th pick in this year's NBA draft. And for today's video, I'm going to be discussing a lot of different factors the Raptors should take into consideration before they ultimately make their pick at the 13th spot. So if you're ready to watch this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you wish to hit the subscribe button as well, that'd be very much appreciated. So with that being said, let's get into today's video. So there's no shout out for today's video, but Rue, you wanted me to post this comment from our conversation and last video in regards to Kyle Lowry's performance against the Orlando Magic in game one. This is what you had to say. So here's the comment, but let's talk about the Toronto Raptors because there are a list of categories, a list of statistics, we have to go through and highlight some of their weaknesses. And perhaps these are things they could solve through the draft. Now, taking a look at this chart here, you'll notice the Raptors aren't a very good offensive team, and you'll notice there's a trend here. But let's start with points per game. You'll notice the Raptors are 24th or were 24th this past season in points per game, with averaging 112.9. Kind of funny, we do see the Miami Heat there considering they're in the Eastern Conference and a one win away from the finals, but the Raptors clearly have a lot of flaws on the offensive side. Now, you go through the list of next chart here, you'll notice the same thing. Field goal percentage. The Raptors had a lot of players in Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr. that were forcing up a lot of bad shots. A lot of shots they took, which were low quality, but also they were, not the most efficient at it, if we're being honest. Both of those players shot under 43% from the field, which isn't necessarily a good thing considering they're your best three-point shooters and your two of your three best shooters on the team as well. So the Raptors not only struggle in producing points, they don't shoot efficiently, and you take a look at the assist column as well. 23rd in the league, averaging 23.9 assists per game, and same thing with the three-point shooting as well. 28th in the entire league, hitting only 33.5% of their three-point shots. Now, obviously, we haven't even talked about the bench as well. The bench didn't produce as well. I know that could be blamed on ex-coach Nick Nurse, who didn't play his bench consistent minutes as well. But clearly, the Raptors have a lot of flaws on the offensive side. So I've come up with a list of things the Raptors could potentially consider and a list of things they could look for in their potential 13th overall draft pick. Now, here's a list of things I've come up with. Now, the first one here I want to talk about is positional lead or best available. Now, this is really tough because the Raptors have three free agents in Jakob Poeltl, who is very likely to return. Obviously, the Raptors gave up a first-round pick for him. And then they have two big question marks in Gary Trent Jr. and Fred VanVleet. So should the Raptors look to draft a guard, or should they draft best available player? Best available player could be a scenario where there's a power forward that's available do you really want to draft another power forward on a roster that contains Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, Precious Achiuwa, Chris Boucher, who I think we can definitely treat as well. But you already have three power forwards, three decent ones. And again, one of them is up and coming in Precious. Do you potentially draft a floor spacer, considering how bad the Raptors' three-point shooting is? Do you draft a defensive guard? Again, defensive guard, because Gary Trent and Fred could not guard some of the fastest point guards in this league, and they really struggled with that. Do you potentially draft a 3-and-D for backup for OG Anunoby? And also considering all those rumors we heard about him potentially wanting out of Toronto and could be his future replacement. And this one I find really, really interesting. Do you stick with what has worked with the Raptors in the past? A low floor, high ceiling type of guy. Think of someone like a Pascal Siakam. He wasn't the most intriguing prospect coming in, but he had high ceiling. Even someone like an OG Anunoby, right? Scotty Barnes as well. There were a lot of questions when we drafted Scotty Barnes over Jalen Suggs, but taking into consideration what he is now, I think that's the right pick. Again, that's with the Scotty Barnes, I know that's a little bit of a bad example there because he was ultimately projected to go in the top 5 to 6, 7 range. So, but you look at what the Raptors have drafted in the past, guys that are raw, that haven't seen potential, and it has worked out. So maybe the Raptors should not shy away from that. Also looking at some of the other things, a floor general. And let's be honest, I've defended Fred a lot. He's not a pass first point guard. And then Gary Trent Jr. is a chuck first shooting guard. So the Raptors could potentially use a floor general as well. And then the last one here I have is a shot creator. The Raptors struggle in half court offense. Their only realistic shot creator was Pascal Siakam. The others had their moments, but they struggled throughout the season. So do you essentially add someone like that, a shot creator who can definitely help Pascal, but just overall the Raptors offense as well? And I want to discuss a handful of names and what kind of prospects the Raptors should consider. Should they consider someone like a Grady Dick, who's a great three-point shooter, and undoubtedly, if he was drafted by the Toronto Raptors, I think he would come in and help their floor spacing tremendously. He's a good three-point shooter. He's also got size as well, so that really fits into what the Raptors have been doing the last few seasons. We don't know if they're going to abandon the 6'8", 6'9" vision, but someone like a Grady Dick would be very impressive on the Raptors. But the thing you need to take into consideration with Grady Dick is when you take a look at his ceiling, ultimately, I think with Grady Dick, he's going to be a really good role player. Now, here's the argument I can make with a lot of people. I was talking to a friend of mine in a chat, and we had this discussion where do you draft someone who's going to be a really good role player as opposed to someone like, let's say, a Bilal or Rayan Rupert, excuse me, who's got lower ceiling than obviously Grady Dick at the moment, and they won't be able to contribute right away. But I truly believe their ceiling is way up here. They have a lot more potential than Grady Dick. But then you also take into consideration in the future, whether the Raptors are in the playoffs contention, wherever they may be, when you talk about teams wanting three-point shooting and also just when you're trading for really good role players, aka Grady Dick, and where I think he will ultimately be in his future with the Raptors or wherever he may end up, you do ultimately give up first-round picks. Like, look at what we gave up for Jakob Poeltl. And then not only first-round picks, you also have to take into consideration, you have to give up some sort of salary filler and also some assets as well. So do you potentially take Grady Dick, knowing in the future you're going to need floor spacing and the way the league has been trending, and that ultimately in the future you're going to have to give up a first-round pick anyways? So again, that's something you need to take into consideration. And I want to talk about a few other guys as well. Taylor Hendricks is a player that I find really intriguing. I haven't really looked into too much, but I know for a fact that he is a power forward. He's a floor spacer. He's also a shot blocker as well. Now, when I think about this, I'm not saying that he's going to be this player, but I think of someone like a Chris Boucher. Do the Raptors, again, this argument goes back with best available or positional need. Like, do you draft Taylor Hendricks knowing that he's a power forward and the Raptors already have Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, Chris Boucher, Precious Achiuwa? I mean, they can potentially move Chris Boucher, which is fine, but you still already have so many power forwards. And then it's, I wouldn't say overlapping skills, but where do you fit these guys? Do you ultimately force Scotty to, I know he's played point guard, but do you put Scotty in a power point guard position and then maybe move Precious as a 3 and D? So again, you're kind of playing guys out of position to get everyone involved and get the minutes as well. So that's a big question for me over positional need. I mean, like I said, trades can happen. Chris Boucher can get moved. For all we know, Precious can get moved. Anything can happen in the NBA. So do you draft best available player? Now, I want to talk about Anthony Black real quick as well, because he's a floor general. He's also a defensive guard as well. He's, I believe, 6'7", a really good floor general, one of the best passers in this year's NBA draft. But the issue with him is that he has overlapping skills to Scotty Barnes. I'm not saying he's Scotty Barnes, but when you look at Scotty Barnes and what he's able to do, he has point guard ability duties. He can pass very well. He also attacks the basket, which is, I mean, what kind of Anthony Black can do, but he's not a great three-point shooter, both of them. So now do you get guys that are overlapping skills, or do you draft a point guard that can't shoot at all, knowing that you need three-point shooting? So again, that becomes the challenging part for the Raptors when they're looking to draft a lot of these guys. Now, there are a few more guys I want to quickly touch upon before we end this video. Bryce Sensabaugh. I really like his offensive side, but there have been questions about him forcing his shot a little bit too much. Now, obviously, as Raptors fans, we've seen what Fred and Gary can do, selfishly force up a lot of shots. Do we really want someone like that? And also, Bryce is someone who's 6'6", small forward, but he's not a good defensive player. So again, do you ultimately, as Raptors management, do you abandon what you have been looking for players, whether that's through the draft, whether that's through free agency? You've always looked for guys that can play two-way. Again, I know Gary's not necessarily that guy, but still, he at least gets some steals as well. So again, do you potentially draft someone like a Bryce Sensabaugh, who has pretty good shot creation ability? Let's be honest. He could be, I think, a very good offensive player in the NBA as well. Now, ultimately, guys, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think the Raptors should go into this draft with an open mind. They should consider all possibilities. Like I said, positional need. Do you possibly draft Taylor Hendricks if he's available at the 13? Do you do Grady Dick, knowing that he's ultimately only going to be a role player? Or do you do this, which is my favorite? I'm going to talk about low floor, high ceiling, which is you draft a guy who's not going to impact your team right now, but in 3 or 4 seasons, Rayan Rupert, Bilal Coulibaly. I know people may not be high on Rayan based off the people I've talked to, Raptors communities, but Rayan, and you take Grady Dick, I think Rayan's ceiling is there. Grady Dick can come in, impact the Raptors right away with his floor spacing ability, but I think Rayan in the long term is going to be a much higher impact player. So again, there's always that potential there. So again, I don't know what the Raptors will do. I think there are definitely different factors we need to take into consideration. But one thing I don't think the Raptors should do is not take these things into consideration. Again, the management is much smarter than I am. So I know I'm sure they're probably 10 steps ahead of me and they've taken these things into consideration. But I think the Raptors should definitely consider, look, ultimately they do have some tough decisions, right? Like Grady Dick could be great. Taylor Hendricks could be great. Or do you draft someone like a Bilal or Rayon? So again, that's the question I have for you guys today. Do you draft potentially someone knowing they can impact your team right away, but in the long run, they're only going to be a good role player? Or do you draft someone that has a lower floor at the moment, but their ceiling is going to be much higher in the future? So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, I do have a trivia question for you today. And the trivia question is, which team averages the most points per game in this year's postseason? Is it A, Celtics? Is it B, the Nuggets? Is it C, the Suns? Or is it D, the Bucks? So whoever answers this trivia question correctly first in the comment section gets a shout out in my next video. So that will be it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. And I hope you guys have yourselves a great day.